The desert at dusk is a place where time feels as if it exhales. The heat that once shimmered above the sand begins to dissolve into a cooler, quieter breath. The wind changes character, slowing, softening, no longer carrying the sting of the day's heat, but the dry whisper of ancient dust. The sky fades in slow gradients, pale gold bleeding into deep indigo. Here, in this space between day and night, there is a silhouette that does not shift with the dunes. At first, you might mistake it for a mountain, its edges blunt, yet certain, defying the restless sand that swallows lesser things. But as you draw closer, perhaps on foot, perhaps in the mind's eye, you see the geometry. Angles too precise for nature's hand, a symmetry too deliberate to be coincidence. It is a pyramid, rising from the earth, as if it has always been here, as if the desert itself has decided to carry it through eternity. No signs point to it. No name in a guidebook marks its presence. Even the locals speak of it rarely, and when they do, it is with the careful choice of those discussing something that doesn't quite belong in the everyday world. The air around it seems heavier, not in menace, but in a weight of memory, memories we do not possess. It is not part of Egypt's storied legacy, nor does it share the clustered company of Mesoamerican monuments. There are no carved faces on its sides, no hieroglyphs cut into its stones. Its silence is absolute, and yet it stands, calm, unmoved, immune to the centuries. If you were to walk the perimeter, you might notice the erosion, not the soft crumbling of wind over centuries, but weathering patterns that speak of a structure far older than any human record in this region. The stones themselves are massive, far beyond the practical limits of what nearby cultures were known to lift or shape. They fit together so tightly that the seams are almost invisible, as if the builders, whoever they were, crafted the blocks not for speed, but for eternity. And yet, there are no builders, at least none that history acknowledges. We know the pyramids of Giza because their architects carved their ambitions into stone. We know the names of the pharaohs who commanded them, the gods they honored, the workers who lived and died beneath their shadows. But this pyramid, this solitary shadow against the desert sky, has no story carved into its flanks. When it first appeared in modern consciousness, it was not the subject of an expedition but the accidental discovery of travelers who had been pushed off course. Some say it was a sandstorm that revealed it, clearing away a veil of dunes to show a glimpse of its flanks. Others insist it was always in plain sight, and only our inattention kept us from seeing it. This is the first thing you notice about the mystery. It is not that we cannot find it, it is that even when we do, it tells us nothing. The light begins to fade further, and the desert takes on its nocturnal soul. Stars prick into view, one by one, until the sky seems to mirror the sand below in an infinite reflection, and there, between these two endless fields, the sky above and the earth beneath, sits the pyramid, as steady as a heartbeat in deep sleep. Its size is not colossal, not in the way that makes you gasp from sheer scale, but it carries another kind of power proportion. Every side, every angle, feels balanced. There is no sense of human haste in its creation. It feels inevitable, as if it simply emerged here, complete. You can imagine what it might have been like thousands of years ago, if indeed it is thousands of years old. Was there once a city here? Did voices echo between its stones, prayers rise toward a sun we no longer see in the same sky, or did it stand alone then too, watching civilizations rise and crumble at the edges of the horizon? This is where the mind begins to wander, into that space between fact and the unknowable. In that space, your thoughts slow. The night deepens. The line between what you can prove and what you can only imagine becomes softer. Some say such structures are like mirrors, reflecting back whatever a culture or an individual most fears or desires. To a modern historian, it may be a frustrating absence of evidence. To a dreamer lying in the sand, gazing upward, it may be proof of some forgotten chapter in the human story, or even a hint of something not entirely human at all. In the hush of the desert night, the pyramid's shadow stretches longer than its own height, cast by a moon nearly full. Its edges remain straight and true, even in the softened light. The stars above seem arranged as if in silent conversation with it, some constellation long faded from our cultural memory, perhaps still marked in its alignment. You take in the scene and realize that here, nothing is rushed, time is not measured in days or years, but in the slow wearing away of stone that has not yet yielded to the desert's persistence. Whatever its origin, the pyramid has succeeded at one thing: it has outlasted the memory of its makers. In that thought lies the first mystery, and perhaps the most haunting one of all. Not who built it, nor when, nor even why, but how something so vast and deliberate could survive the centuries while every trace of the hands that made it has been erased. The desert wind picks up again, just enough to lift the edge of your imagination and carry it forward. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the rest of the world turns in its sleep, unaware of this quiet sentinel standing watch over nothing but sand and sky. And so the story begins, not with the laying of a stone, but with the realization that some structures are built not to be remembered, but to remember us. If the pyramid we have just met is defined by silence, the rest of the world's pyramids speak in voices carved into stone. To understand how unusual this lone monument truly is, we must step away from its shadow and into the world of pyramids, whose stories are well known. Monuments that announce their origins with the clarity of a signature. Across the deserts of Egypt, the great pyramids rise like anchors of history. The Pyramid of Khufu at Giza is not just a structure, it is a statement. Its blocks number in the millions. Its construction is chronicled in surrounding tombs, where inscriptions tell of overseers, quarry workers, and priests. Nearby temples bear the names of kings and gods. Even the logistics, the ramps, the seasonal labor forces, the alignment to the cardinal points, are subjects of study, so detailed that scholars can recreate, step by careful step, the methods by which they were built. In Mesoamerica, the pyramids of Teotihuacan and the Maya rise in dense clusters, surrounded by plazas, ball courts, and murals. These are living cities in stone, each layer revealing religious ceremonies, dynastic rivalries, and astronomical observations. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza greets the equinox with a serpent of shadow descending its staircase, an event both symbolic and intentional, a signature of a culture that recorded its knowledge in architecture. Further south, in the Sudanese desert, the pyramids of Meroe stand as the funerary monuments of the kingdom of Kush. Their scale is smaller than Giza's giants, but they are rich in inscriptions. Here too, the builders made sure their names and purposes endured. Hieroglyphs and iconography tell the stories of kings, queens, and gods, linking stone to a clear historical lineage. And beyond the deserts, in China's Shanxi province, pyramid-like mausoleums mark the resting places of emperors, surrounded by vast necropolises. Though often hidden beneath vegetation, these too are well accounted for in chronicles, maps, and imperial records. They do not exist in a vacuum. They exist in a web of cultural memory. In all of these cases, the builders left behind an ecosystem of evidence, records, settlements, tools, even the scars on the land from where stone was quarried and transported. These markers are not merely academic curiosities, they are threads that connect a monument to its people, allowing historians to weave a coherent narrative. And therein lies the contrast. The pyramid in our mystery has none of these threads. In Egypt, for instance, a pyramid without an associated funerary complex would be unthinkable. In Mesoamerica, a pyramid without iconography or ceremonial platforms would stand out as incomplete. Across known history, pyramids are rarely isolated acts of architecture. They are cultural keystones, physical expressions of a society's beliefs, power, and knowledge. Yet this nameless pyramid stands alone, no village at its feet, no inscriptions on its flanks, no temple in its shadow. There is not even a trace of rubble that might suggest an adjacent settlement, worn away by time. If it ever was part of a complex, the desert has erased it without leaving the faint scars archaeologists expect to find. scars that remain visible in most ancient sites, even after thousands of years. To fully grasp the strangeness, it helps to imagine a historian standing before it for the first time. In the presence of the Great Pyramid of Giza, they can point to a horizon and say, "There is the quarry from which these stones were cut." At Teotihuacan, they can place a finger on a mural and connect the art to the pyramid's ceremonial role. At Meroe, they can read the names of queens and gods from the walls themselves. But here, the historian stands with nothing but the structure itself, no road, no stone chip, no scrap of pottery, to place it within a time or culture. The pyramid offers itself as an artifact without context, as if it were a fragment torn from a book whose remaining pages have been burned. Some might think this simply means the evidence lies buried deeper, waiting to be found. After all, the desert is vast, and many of its secrets remain under sand and stone. But even here, the comparison is strange. When ancient monuments are buried, the remains of their associated culture often emerge alongside them. Buried cities, lost irrigation systems, traces of human activity preserved in layers of soil. Around the nameless pyramid, the ground tells a different story. Archaeological surveys have found almost nothing, no buried walls, no remnants of human habitation, only the desert's own geology. It is as though the pyramid arrived in this place fully formed, without ever having been part of a living community. This absence forces us to consider the possibility that we are looking at a category outside the familiar. Known pyramids follow a pattern. They are built with a purpose we can at least partially deduce, whether funerary, ceremonial, or astronomical, and they are surrounded by the marks of the civilization that made them. This one does not fit the pattern. In the calm of the night, lying in bed with this thought, the mind begins to circle around a quieter but deeper question. If pyramids are typically born from the collective effort of an entire culture, then what kind of force, human or otherwise, creates one without leaving behind the culture itself? The more you consider it, the more the silence of this structure feels deliberate. It is not merely that history has failed to record its builders, it is that the pyramid refuses to tell you anything about them. Its geometry is perfect, but its biography is absent. Its presence is absolute, but its story is a void. In this way, it becomes the inverse of the pyramids we know. Where others are rooted in identity, this one is rooted in anonymity. Where others shout their existence across millennia, this one whispers, just enough for us to know it is there, but never enough to follow the whisper back to its source. And yet the lack of answers is its greatest power. The human mind is wired to close loops, to solve puzzles, to turn fragments into wholes. When presented with a pyramid that refuses to be solved, our curiosity is not diminished, it is sharpened. Perhaps this is why the mystery persists, decade after decade. It stands not as an orphaned monument, but as an intentional enigma. And as we step away from the comfort of known pyramids, with their carved names and well-mapped histories, we find ourselves drifting back toward the solitary one we began with. Only now, it feels even stranger. Because now we know exactly how much a pyramid can tell us, and how loudly this one refuses to speak. From here the path leads us toward its first appearance in modern history, a story that, like the pyramid itself, begins not with a plan but with an accident. History often arrives to us in fragments, broken pottery, faded ink, weathered stone. But every so often, it arrives not in pieces but whole, as if it had been waiting for someone to stumble upon it. That is how the pyramid, with no known builders, entered modern awareness. It was not discovered by an expedition, armed with maps and funding, nor by an academic team searching for ruins. Instead, it appeared in the path of men who were not looking for it at all. The year was the early 20th century, a time when vast regions of desert remained uncharted on Western maps. The story, pieced together from the accounts of those who returned, begins with a caravan caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were traders, moving between small oases, carrying goods and letters across the barren stretch of sand. The desert was in one of its deceptive moods, calm skies, gentle winds, until, without warning, the air turned thick and hot. A line of darkness appeared on the horizon, swelling until it consumed the sky. Within minutes, the caravan was engulfed in a sandstorm. If you have never been inside such a storm, imagine the world vanishing in a single breath. The wind howls in every direction at once, and the sand stings like needles. The sun disappears. There is no up or down, only a roiling, shifting wall of dust that seems to strip away all sense of place. For hours, they pushed through it, each step an act of faith. By the time the storm began to weaken, they were far from their intended route, their landmarks erased, and that was when one of them saw it. At first, the shape was barely distinguishable, a darker shadow in a world of shifting beige, but as the storm cleared, it became undeniable. The sharp angles, the deliberate geometry, the unmistakable silhouette of a pyramid. They approached slowly, unsure if it was a mirage. The desert is full of tricks, heat bending light, distance warping shape, but as they drew closer, the structure did not fade. It only grew sharper, more real, more massive. No settlement surrounded it. No road led to it. There was only the pyramid, emerging from the sand like a memory the earth had decided to reveal for reasons of its own. They circled it at a cautious distance, noting its height and the way its stones seemed to resist the erosion that had eaten away at countless other ruins in the region. There were no markings, no statues, no entrance visible at ground level, only the flawless slope of weathered stone. When they reached the leeward side, they saw that the sandstorm had scoured a section clean, revealing a base stone that seemed almost polished. The craftsmanship was undeniable, each block fitted so precisely that even the desert wind could not drive grains of sand into the seams. The traders did not linger. The desert was not a place to spend idle hours, especially so far from water, but the image of the pyramid stayed with them. When they finally reached an oasis, they told their story. And as all great mysteries do, it spread, not through official channels at first, but through campfire conversations and passing remarks to travelers heading in the opposite direction. Eventually, word reached explorers, scholars, and governments. Small reconnaissance parties set out to verify the claim. Some returned with sketches and rough coordinates. Others never came back at all, claimed by the same desert that had hidden the pyramid for centuries, perhaps millennia. The first photographs, taken years later, confirmed the traders' account, a solitary pyramid, partially buried in shifting sands, its surface almost entirely free of the inscriptions that marked other ancient monuments. Those who examined the images noted strange details. The angles were subtly different from Egyptian designs, the proportions not quite matching those of Mesoamerican pyramids. The erosion suggested great age, yet the sharpness of certain edges hinted at preservation beyond what was expected. From the beginning, the pyramid resisted classification. It was too large to be dismissed as a minor local monument, yet too isolated to fit into any known cultural network. It bore no obvious religious or funerary markers, and no artifacts were found nearby to place it within a specific historical frame. The earliest official expedition, funded jointly by a university and a colonial administration, spent weeks mapping the site. They measured each side, documented the type of stone, and searched for signs of surrounding structures. But beyond the pyramid itself, the land was barren. No pottery shards, no collapsed walls, no indication that human life had ever clustered here. It was as if the pyramid had been dropped into the desert without ever having been part of a living settlement. This absence troubled the lead archaeologist. In his journal, he wrote, "Every pyramid I have studied before has been a statement of a culture, its power, its faith, its connection to the land. This is something else entirely. It is not a monument in the human sense, it is as though it is the culture, and the rest has been erased." The choice of word erased would echo in later discussions. Was the culture that built it destroyed so completely that even their ruins vanished, or had there never been a surrounding culture to begin with? The team attempted to date the pyramid using early geological methods. The results were inconclusive, the erosion patterns conflicting with known timelines for human settlement in the region. Some stones bore marks that suggested extreme age, perhaps older than the earliest civilizations in the area, while others seemed inexplicably well preserved, as if sheltered from the elements for centuries before being exposed. When the expedition returned, they brought with them detailed reports, but also more questions than answers, and as is often the case with mysteries, these questions only deepened the fascination. Scholars debated its origin in journals, while writers of the time romanticized it in articles and novels. Each retelling added its own shade of speculation: lost kingdoms, ancient engineers, even visitors from far beyond the earth. But one detail was never exaggerated: the absolute isolation of the pyramid. Those who had seen it with their own eyes agreed it stood alone, and in its solitude lay its greatest enigma. The desert, in its endless patience, had hidden the pyramid for untold centuries, only to reveal it by chance to a handful of traders, and then, almost as if regretting the slip, it began to reclaim it again. Within a few years, shifting dunes partially covered the lower courses of stone, erasing the clean lines that the storm had revealed. Today, to stand before it is to stand in a place where human history and natural time blur. You see not only the work of hands long vanished, but also the work of the desert itself, sculpting, concealing, revealing. The pyramid seems less a relic than a participant in the landscape, as if it and the sands have an unspoken agreement about how much of itself should be shown. And so its story begins not with a triumphant unveiling, but with a hesitant introduction, half seen through the dust of a storm, half remembered in the telling, a fragment of a history that refuses to give itself away all at once. If the pyramid's isolation is its first riddle, the stones it is made from are its second. And this riddle is stranger still, because it's not just the shape, the age, or the placement of the stones that defy explanation, but the very fact that they are here at all. The first geological surveys arrived decades after the pyramid's rediscovery. A team of scientists, geologists, mineralogists, and archaeologists trekked through the desert, their instruments strapped to the backs of camels, their minds prepared for a straightforward analysis. Stone is stone, after all, and in most ancient monuments, the type of stone tells you the story of where it came from, how it was cut, and the journey it made to reach the construction site. The moment they examined the pyramid's base, that expectation began to fracture. The blocks were massive, some weighing more than 40 tons, yet the nearest known quarry capable of producing such stone lay over 400 kilometers away, across unforgiving terrain. Moving such blocks today would require cranes, trucks, and precise logistics. Moving them in the ancient world would demand thousands of workers, a complex network of ramps and sledges, and months, perhaps years of planning. And yet there is no evidence of such an operation, no remnants of quarry camps, no stone debris left from shaping the blocks on site, no path of wear in the desert leading toward the pyramid's location. It is as though the blocks had appeared fully formed, waiting to be stacked into their final form. Then came the composition analysis. The stone was a kind of metamorphic rock, unusually dense and shot through with mineral inclusions that made it resistant to erosion. This, the scientists noted, was part of why the pyramid had endured while other structures in the region crumbled. But the mineral profile presented an immediate problem. It matched no known formation in the surrounding region. In geological terms, the pyramid stones were foreign, not local, not even regionally plausible. Their closest match was to a quarry site far to the north, beyond a stretch of land that had been inhospitable desert for thousands of years before the earliest estimated dates for the pyramid's construction. Even stranger, the cut surfaces of the stones revealed microscopic patterns that suggested a method of shaping unknown in the archaeological record. The edges were so precise that even with modern tools, such accuracy would require laser-guided equipment or diamond-edged saws. Under magnification, the surfaces showed parallel striations finer than a human hair, marks that did not match the rough chiseling techniques of known ancient builders. The team's report, published quietly in an academic journal, avoided sensational language. It stated only that the stones present anomalies in both source location and working method, which cannot be fully accounted for by current historical models. But in private, some of the scientists admitted their astonishment. One mineralogist reportedly told a colleague, "If I didn't know better, I'd say these stones were made, not quarried, made, like an engineered material." But how in an age when metallurgy itself was in its infancy? Here, the mystery deepens in two directions. First, the logistical impossibility, moving stones of this size and density, such vast distances, without leaving a trace of infrastructure. Second, the technological impossibility, shaping them with a precision that challenges even modern equipment. Some have tried to resolve these questions by suggesting that the pyramid is far younger than it appears, that it is a recent construction, weathered by deliberate aging techniques, perhaps built as a hoax. But this theory collapses under closer scrutiny. The erosion patterns are consistent with thousands of years of exposure to wind and sand, not decades or centuries. The desert itself has partially reclaimed the lower courses of stone in a way that would be almost impossible to fake without nature's patient hand. Other researchers point to the possibility of lost techniques, methods of moving and shaping stone that ancient builders once knew, but that have been erased from history. There is precedent for this. Civilizations have repeatedly developed technologies that later generations forgot. The Roman recipe for concrete, for example, produced structures that have outlasted many modern ones, yet it was lost for over 1,000 years before being rediscovered. Could the builders of this pyramid have possessed a similar kind of lost knowledge? If so, the question remains, who were they, and why is there no trace of them elsewhere? The stones themselves seem to resist the question. In the midday sun, they glow faintly with a pale, almost metallic sheen. At night, under starlight, they absorb more shadow than their surroundings, making the pyramid appear darker than the dunes around it. If you run your hand along one, you feel the fine grain of the surface, smoother than typical quarried stone, almost like glass worn by centuries of water. Yet this is a place where no river has flowed in recorded history. There are also the seamless joins. In most stone structures, even the most carefully fitted blocks reveal hairline gaps over time, as the earth shifts and materials expand or contract with temperature changes. Here, the gaps are so minimal that a thin blade cannot slip between them. This precision suggests not only masterful craftsmanship, but also an understanding of the material's behavior over centuries, an understanding that would require either extraordinary foresight or technology far beyond what we attribute to ancient builders. For the sleep-bound listener, these details invite a different kind of reflection. The mind drifts between the factual and the fantastical. One moment, you are picturing teams of ancient workers pulling ropes under a burning sun. The next you imagine something entirely different, perhaps machines we no longer understand, or methods that blur the line between engineering and art. And yet for all these strangenesses, the pyramid offers no decoration, no inscription to guide us. Its builders, whoever they were, left us only the stone itself, stone that refuses to match its surroundings, shaped in a way that refuses to match our histories. In this refusal lies its poetry. Other monuments tell their stories openly, in carvings and inscriptions. This one tells its story only through the impossibility of its existence. It forces us to look closer, to question the very frameworks we use to measure time and technology. By the end of the geological study, the team could only agree on one thing: the pyramid could not be explained without rewriting at least part of what we think we know about ancient construction. But rewriting history is slow work, and so the pyramid remains, for now, in the margins, present but unexplained, enduring but unclaimed. From here, the path of our story shifts away from the stones themselves and toward the people who have tried, in their own ways, to explain them, not scientists, but storytellers. For while the earth offers few clues, the desert has its own form of record-keeping, the legends carried in the memories of those who have lived at its edges. If science gives us the facts we can hold in our hands, legend gives us the truths we feel in our bones. Around the edges of the desert, where villages cluster near wells and date palms, The pyramid has always been known, not as an archaeological site, but as a presence, a thing that exists the way a mountain exists, not to be explained, only acknowledged. Here the air at night is heavy with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of low conversation. People sit on woven mats, sharing tea brewed black and sweet, their words rising and falling with the rhythm of stories told countless times before. And inevitably, when the conversation turns to the deep desert, someone will speak of the pyramid. It is not called a pyramid in these stories. Not always. Some call it Almanhar, the fallen one, as though it descended from the sky. Others call it Beit al-Remel, house of sand, as though the desert itself built it. There are older names too, whispered in languages no longer spoken in the villages, words that even the tellers do not fully understand, but repeat because their grandparents repeated them. The stories do not agree. In one, the pyramid was built by giants who roamed the earth before the coming of man, each stone carried in a single hand. In another, it was not built at all, but grew rising from the sand over 1,000 nights until it reached its final shape, after which it never changed. Some say it was a tomb for a great ruler whose name is forbidden to speak. Others insist it was not a tomb, but a gate meant to be closed forever. There is a tale told by a tribe that once roamed closer to the pyramid's location before the desert drove them away. In their version, the structure is the last remnant of a city swallowed by the earth in a single day. The people of that city, it is said, were gifted with knowledge not meant for mortals, and when they tried to use it to control the skies, the ground itself opened beneath them. The city was taken, but the pyramid remained, perhaps as a warning, perhaps as a marker for something buried deeper still. Children in these villages are warned never to go near it, not because it is dangerous in a physical sense, but because it is hungry. The old women speak of travelers who went to see the pyramid and returned different, silent, distracted, no longer interested in the lives they once lived. Some say the pyramid keeps a part of you if you get too close, a memory, a name, a dream you will never remember having. Not all the stories are ominous. Some speak of it as a place of refuge. There is a winter legend of a caravan lost in a storm that found shelter at the pyramid's base. In the morning, they discovered that the sand around them was untouched by wind, as though they had been inside a bubble of calm. In gratitude, they left offerings, water, dates, and a small silver charm at the base. When they returned years later, the offerings were gone, but in their place they found a perfectly smooth stone, unlike any in the surrounding desert. The most intriguing legends are those that describe lights, flickers of blue or white, that appear near the apex at certain times of year, vanishing as quickly as they come. Some swear they are lightning trapped in stone, others say they are stars caught in its geometry. A few believe they are signals meant for someone, or something that still watches from far away. And then there are the voices. Not everyone has heard them, but enough have that the stories persist. They are described as low and resonant, more vibration than sound, felt in the chest rather than heard in the ears. The voices speak no known language. Some listeners say they sound like chanting, others like a single word stretched out into eternity. One tale claims that if you place your ear to the stone on a still night, you can hear the desert breathing through it. What makes these legends compelling is not just their content, but their persistence. In a region where generations pass with little written record, oral histories shift and adapt, details blur, meanings change. But the pyramid remains constant in them, a fixed point in the shifting sands of memory. Scholars often dismiss such tales as poetic embellishments, the natural product of human imagination when faced with something unexplained. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps the stories are only stories. But there is something else to consider. In many cultures, myths are not inventions, they are vessels. They carry fragments of truth, wrapped in the language of metaphor and symbolism, so they can survive when the literal facts are lost. Could it be that these stories, scattered and contradictory though they are, preserve some echo of the pyramid's origin, a memory of its builders, transformed by centuries of retelling? until the details became impossible to separate from invention. It is a tempting thought, especially in the quiet hours, when the mind begins to wander. You picture the tribes moving across the desert, seeing the pyramid rise out of the horizon and telling their children what it must mean. Those children telling theirs, each generation adding its own fears, its own hopes, until the truth is buried beneath the weight of centuries. If the science of the pyramid stones leaves us with hard, cold impossibilities, the legends give us something warmer, if no less strange. The sense that this structure is alive in the cultural memory of those who live within sight, or at least within reach of it. It is not just an object, it is a character in their history, a silent witness to lives and events that the written record has forgotten. And while the scholars measure and date and theorize, the people of the desert simply live with it. They greet it from afar. They give it names. They pass it in stories, as if keeping it alive through the act of telling. In the calm of the night, these whispers mingle with the wind. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear them, faint, shifting, impossible to hold. Stories that change each time they are told, yet always lead back to the same unmoving shape in the sand. From here, our path turns once more from the stories of those who live in the shadow of the pyramid, to the possibility that those shadows are all that remain of a civilization that once stood here. Not just a monument without builders, but the last surviving trace of a people erased from history. Every pyramid we know, Egyptian, Mesoamerican, Nubian, was the work of a civilization that left its fingerprints on history. Not just the stones, but the language, the art, the tools, the graves of the workers, the debris of daily life. Civilizations, like tides, leave a shoreline of traces long after they recede. And yet here stands this solitary monument, unmoored from any such shoreline. If it is the work of human hands, then those hands belong to a people who have vanished so completely that only this structure remains. No city ruins, no burial sites, no pottery, or weapons, or jewelry, no stray inscriptions in an undeciphered script, nothing. The absence is so complete that it suggests not a slow fading, but a sudden erasure, an entire culture lost as if plucked from the timeline. This is not without precedent. Archaeology is full of sudden arrivals and disappearances, cultures whose existence we only know because we stumbled upon the remnants of their greatest works. Consider Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, massive stone circles erected over 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture was thought to have taken root. There are no nearby cities, no villages, no evidence of a permanent settlement, yet the stones bear intricate carvings and precise alignments. Its builders remain nameless, their reasons unknowable. Or take the Indus Valley civilization, once sprawling across what is now Pakistan and India. They had advanced urban planning, drainage systems, standardized weights, and seals bearing a script we have yet to decipher. But around 1900 BCE, their cities were abandoned, the people scattered, and their language, their political structure, their myths, all dissolved into history's shadows. Even more remote is Nan Madol in the Pacific, a city built on a reef, with basalt columns weighing tons stacked in walls and causeways. The culture that built it vanished, leaving only the stones and a web of legends about sorcerers and foreign kings. These examples remind us of an uncomfortable truth. Civilizations can be erased so thoroughly that they survive only as questions. If this has happened before, could the pyramid in the deep desert be the lone survivor of another such erasure? If so, we can imagine the outlines of their story. Perhaps they thrived during a wetter period, when rivers flowed where now there is only sand. Their city might have been a hub of trade, the pyramid a temple or observatory, or ceremonial heart. But then the climate shifted, drought came, the rivers failed, the land turned against them, or perhaps their end came, not from the sky, but from the earth, a great earthquake, a volcanic ash cloud, a shift in the very ground beneath their feet, whole populations displaced, entire records destroyed. In 1,000 years, even the memory of their name could vanish. There is also the more haunting possibility: human hands can erase as thoroughly as nature. Conquest, genocide, cultural suppression. History has many ways of burying inconvenient peoples. A conquering power may have leveled the city and repurposed the land, leaving only the pyramid, too large to dismantle, too solid to destroy. Its purpose forgotten, it became simply part of the landscape, stripped of the meaning it once held. The desert has a particular talent for this kind of obliteration. Sand does not just cover, it consumes. It fills streets and homes, wears away inscriptions, smooths sharp edges until they are unreadable. In time, even the tallest structures can vanish beneath its shifting surface. And yet somehow, this pyramid resisted full burial. Whether by design or by luck, it has remained just visible enough to invite questions. Some archaeologists point to the possibility of a mother culture, a civilization older than any we have confirmed, one that seeded architectural ideas across continents. They note that pyramidal forms appear in Egypt, Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia, and East Asia, often without clear evidence of direct contact. Could the nameless builders of this desert pyramid have been part of such a network, their presence here a branch of a greater now forgotten tree? If that is the case, this pyramid might not be an anomaly at all, but a surviving outpost of a pattern we only half understand. Its isolation could be a trick of survival, the rest of its kin swallowed by the sands, the seas or the jungle, leaving this one sentinel to bear silent witness. For nighttime listeners, there's a strange comfort in imagining these lost builders. You picture them setting the first stone, knowing they might never see the last placed. You imagine the music they might have played during ceremonies, the taste of the bread baked in the shadows of the construction ramps, the way the air must have smelled when the mortar was still wet. These small details make them real, more real than the absence their disappearance has left behind. And yet, just as quickly, the mind returns to the impossible fact: there is no trace of them anywhere else. If they truly built this pyramid, they have been erased, not just from their own land, but from human memory itself. Here the mystery becomes not just archaeological, but existential. We tend to think of history as cumulative, as a steady accretion of knowledge and record, but this pyramid, and the possible civilization behind it, remind us that history is more like a tide, sometimes leaving deposits on the shore, sometimes sweeping them back into the depths, never to be seen again. In the stillness of the desert night, with the stars hanging low and bright above the pyramid, it is possible to feel the weight of that truth. We are not just looking at a monument, we are looking at an absence given shape. This structure is the shadow of something far larger that no longer exists, a shadow that has outlasted the thing that cast it. From here, our path turns upward to the apex of the pyramid itself, and to a new layer of the enigma, its strange and deliberate relationship with the sky. For if we cannot find the builders in the earth, perhaps we will find them in the stars. For as long as humans have been stacking stones into shapes that defy the horizon, they have been looking upward. Pyramids are not only rooted in the earth, they are often oriented toward the sky, their geometry speaking a language of angles and stars. The nameless pyramid, in the deep desert, is no exception. But here, as with everything else about it, the familiar becomes strange. When surveyors first mapped the structure, they assumed its sides would follow the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, just as in Egypt and elsewhere. And indeed, at first glance, it seemed to, but the precision was unsettlingly exact. The pyramid's north-facing side aligns to true north within a fraction of a degree, more precise than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and achieved without the magnetic compass, which would not have helped in any case, since true north shifts over centuries. That was the first anomaly. The second came when astronomers began to test whether its alignment matched any particular celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or the rising of significant stars. The results were startling. The pyramid appears to align not to the sky as it is now, but to the sky as it was thousands of years ago. Specifically, its orientation matches the position of certain constellations during a time when the Earth's axial tilt and precession placed the stars in subtly different positions. This suggests that the builders, whoever they were, either lived in that era or had knowledge of what the sky looked like then. The primary alignment appears to be with Orion's belt, a familiar constellation in many ancient cultures. In Egypt, Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. In other traditions, its three bright stars marked a celestial hunter or warrior. Here, the alignment is even more exact than at Giza, as if the builders were not merely inspired by the constellation, but attempting to replicate its geometry on the ground. Another alignment points towards Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Sirius has long been a marker of seasonal change, its rising linked to floods, planting, and harvest in various civilizations. But here, the alignment is offset, not towards Sirius's current position, but toward where it would have risen approximately 10,500 years ago. There is also a more subtle feature. At certain times of the year, when the sun sets at just the right point on the horizon, its light falls along a single edge of the pyramid in such a way that it appears to split the structure into two perfect halves, one in light, one in shadow. This effect lasts only for a few minutes, but in those minutes, the pyramid seems transformed into a sundial of impossible scale. Such precision raises questions. To create these alignments, the builders would have needed both a deep understanding of astronomy and the ability to translate that understanding into monumental architecture. In other words, they were not only skilled engineers, but skilled skywatchers, and yet, there are no other signs of such astronomical sophistication in the region's archaeological record, no observatories, no star charts, no carved records of celestial events. This pyramid stands alone, as if its builders poured their entire astronomical knowledge into this one structure and left nothing else behind. Some researchers suggest that this isolation may be deliberate, that the pyramid was intended as a kind of celestial archive, encoding star positions and alignments for future generations. In this view, it is less a tomb or temple than a message in stone, one whose meaning could only be read by those who understand the language of the sky. Others see something more ritualistic. Perhaps ceremonies were held here, timed to the movement of the stars, the people gathering to watch as the heavens and the pyramid fell into perfect harmony for a few moments each year. The silence of the structure now would then be the echo of voices long gone, the absence of drums and chants that once marked those nights. For the nighttime listener, the image is haunting, a dark desert under a dome of stars, the pyramid standing like a fixed point between earth and sky. The people, whoever they were, waiting, watching until the light or the stars reached their appointed place, and then for a breath in time, the structure was not just stone, but a bridge to something larger. But as with every part of this mystery, there is a darker mirror. If the alignments are indeed intentional, then their age matching a sky that has not existed in millennia pushes the pyramid's construction far back into prehistory. This would mean it predates known civilizations in the region by thousands of years. If that is true, then the builders were not just forgotten, they were forgotten before history began. From here, the path forward leads us to a quieter space, not just the stars above, but the meanings those stars carried for ancient peoples. The pyramid's alignments may be less about science as we think of it today, and more about belief, myth, and the spiritual dialogue between heaven and earth. There is a moment, standing before the pyramid in the stillness of night, when you forget about measurements and data points. The sky above is immense, so vast it seems to press down upon the desert, pulling the horizon close until earth and stars almost meet. In that moment, the pyramid feels less like a human creation and more like a fixed part of the cosmos, as though it has always been here, anchored in both soil and starlight. In ancient cultures, the boundary between earth and sky was never absolute. The heavens were not just a backdrop, but a living realm woven into the lives of those below. Stars were not points of light. They were markers, messengers, ancestors, and gods. They told the time of planting, the onset of floods, the changing of seasons. They were the eternal witnesses to every birth, every battle, every death. To build in alignment with the sky was to participate in a kind of conversation. Each stone was not just laid to hold weight, but to hold meaning. A temple, a tomb, or a pyramid became a bridge, its base rooted in the dust, its apex touching the stars. When you look at the nameless pyramid in this way, the precision of its alignments begins to feel less like an act of engineering and more like an act of devotion. It is as if the builders sought to pin a moment in the heavens to the earth, to create a permanent mirror of something fleeting. But what did they see in those stars? Were they charting cycles, recording knowledge for the future? Or were they crafting a monument to the beings and powers they believed, moved among the constellations? In some traditions, Orion's belt was not merely a hunter, it was a doorway. Sirius was not just the brightest star, it was a sign of renewal, of life returning with the floods. In others, certain stars marked the souls of the dead, journeying along a path in the sky. Perhaps the pyramid was built to honor such a journey. Perhaps the stones were meant to guide someone, or something from one realm to the other. Here the mystery becomes deeply human. We may never know the names or faces of the builders, but we know what it is to look at the night sky and feel both small and infinite, to feel for a moment that we are part of something that has no beginning and no end. For the people who shaped and placed these stones, the stars may have been not just a map, but a promise, a reminder that even as lives end and civilizations fall, there is a permanence above that mirrors the permanence they sought to create below. The desert has taken the people, their language, their homes, but it has not taken the sky. On certain nights, when the wind stills and the air is clear, the stars fall into their ancient positions, and the pyramid meets them with the same silent precision it has kept for millennia. It is in those moments that the structure feels whole again, caught between heaven and earth, just as it was meant to be. From here our journey turns back toward the land. We've looked to the sky to see the builder's possible intentions. Now we will look to the sand beneath our feet, and to the haunting theory that this pyramid was once the heart of a vanished city, a place swallowed so completely that the pyramid remains not as a symbol but as the last survivor. If the pyramid was not meant to stand alone, then it is the last survivor of a place that no longer exists, a place that may once have been alive with sound, color, and movement. Imagine for a moment the desert as it was thousands of years ago. The sand you see now might have been fertile soil. A river, perhaps seasonal, perhaps constant, cut a silver line across the plain. Palms rose along its banks, their fronds moving in a breeze softer and cooler than today's dry wind. The air was filled not with the endless hiss of shifting sand, but with the sounds of life, merchants calling their wares in a marketplace, children playing near the water's edge, the distant ringing of tools on stone. In the center of this imagined city stood the pyramid, not buried in sand, but gleaming in the sun, its stones new and sharp-edged, their pale surface catching the light. Around it stretched wide courtyards and ceremonial avenues. There might have been smaller temples, houses of officials, storage buildings for grain and trade goods. Perhaps gardens flourished in shaded courtyards, and incense burned in braziers during ceremonies that drew the whole population together. Some historians suggest that ancient cities often grew around sacred or monumental structures. If this pyramid was such a structure, it would have been more than a landmark, it would have been the city's heart. Processions might have wound through its avenues during festivals, priests climbing to its summit, to greet the sunrise, or to mark the movement of the stars. But cities are fragile, even when their monuments are not. Climate can turn against them. A river can dry, a flood can destroy crops, a decades-long drought can scatter entire populations. What was once a thriving center of trade and ceremony could empty in a single generation, its people fleeing to lands where water still flowed, and soil still yielded grain. And the desert is quick to claim what is abandoned. Sandstorms erase roads, walls crumble under the constant scouring of wind, roof beams rot and collapse. In time, the city becomes nothing more than uneven mounds beneath the sand, its stones buried and forgotten. If the vanished city theory is true, then the pyramid's survival might not be luck, it might be design. Its massive size, dense stone, and precise construction could have been intended to resist erosion for millennia, ensuring that even if the city fell, the monument would endure. Perhaps the builders wanted to leave behind a single immovable testament to their existence, knowing that everything else could be swept away. There are parallels to this idea in other parts of the world. In the Peruvian Andes, the ruins of the city of Caral lay buried for nearly 5,000 years, its structures hidden beneath dunes until modern excavation revealed them. In Egypt's desert, the remains of once thriving settlements now lie under meters of sand, invisible until a sudden shift in wind or a satellite photograph brings them to light. And yet there is something peculiar about the pyramid's setting that makes this theory both compelling and frustrating. Archaeologists have searched for traces of such a city: walls, pottery, tools, but found almost nothing. If a city existed, its remains are buried deeper than the surface surveys can reach, or else the materials have been destroyed so completely that only the pyramid, in its unnatural resilience, remains. There is another more haunting possibility. What if the city was not buried but dismantled? A conquering force could have taken the stones, wood, and metal for their own purposes, leaving only the pyramid behind. It might have been too large to move, too solid to destroy without enormous effort, and so it was left to stand alone, stripped of the structures that once surrounded it. Over centuries, the victor's own civilization could have fallen, taking the memory of the conquered city with it. Some oral traditions hint at such a fate. A few desert tribes speak of a silent city that was broken by strangers, its people scattered into the sands. In these tales, the pyramid is not the city's heart, but its tombstone, a final, unbroken piece of something that no longer has a name. For the listener, there is a certain melancholy in imagining the lost city. You can picture its streets on a festival day, banners of dyed fabric fluttering, the smell of bread and roasting meat in the air. You can see the faces of people looking up at the pyramid, proud and certain that it would stand for all time. And then you can watch, in your mind's eye, as the years turn against them, the river runs low, the soil turns to dust, the wind rises, and one by one the streets go silent. The desert does not mourn what it takes, it simply folds it into itself, making it part of the shifting landscape. The people who built the pyramid are gone, their city erased, their names unspoken for generations. Only the monument endures, and even it has been changed, its flanks worn by sand, its base half buried, its purpose unreadable. And yet the very fact that it still stands suggests an intention beyond simple utility. If the pyramid was meant to anchor the memory of a city, it has succeeded in a strange way. We may not know the city's name, but we know there was something here worth building for, something worth aligning with the stars, something worth making out of stone, that could outlast everything else. From here, our story moves from the imagined streets of a vanished city back to the stone itself, to the strange conflicting evidence that suggests the pyramid may be far older or far younger than either the city theory or our current historical models can comfortably explain. If the pyramid once stood at the center of a living city, then its stones should tell us when that city lived and when it died. But here, as with everything else about this monument, the evidence refuses to fall neatly into place. The first attempts to date the pyramid came shortly after its modern rediscovery. Without organic materials, like wood or plant matter, embedded in its construction, traditional carbon dating was impossible. Researchers turned instead to indirect methods, analyzing the weathering on the stones, comparing erosion patterns to those of other ancient sites, and studying the type of rock itself. Erosion studies suggested something startling. The deep, rounded wear patterns on the lower courses of stone appeared more consistent with centuries of exposure to flowing water than with the dry abrasion of wind-blown sand. But this region has been arid for thousands of years. If water once shaped these stones, it must have happened during a period when the climate here was radically different, perhaps as far back as 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, when seasonal rivers and wetlands may have existed. This would make the pyramid impossibly old by conventional historical timelines, predating known civilizations in the area by millennia. Skeptics argued for a different interpretation. Perhaps the erosion was the result of rare but intense flash floods, or perhaps the stone was already weathered before it was quarried and placed. Yet even these explanations struggled to account for the patterns, depth, and uniformity. Toolmark analysis deepened the mystery. Under magnification, some stones displayed fine parallel striations, too precise and evenly spaced to have been made by copper or bronze chisels. Modern diamond-edged saws could create similar marks, but such technology has no place in the archaeological record of the era most scholars are willing to assign to the pyramid. Other blocks showed an almost melted appearance along their edges, as if the stone had been softened before shaping. No known ancient method matches this effect. Then came the luminescence dating tests, which measure when minerals in stone were last exposed to sunlight. A handful of samples from the pyramid's foundations suggested that the stones were last in full light between 6,000 and 9,000 years ago. This seemed to support the extreme antiquity theory, until other samples from higher courses produced much younger readings, some as recent as 3,000 years ago. The contradictory results led to heated debate. Was the pyramid built in stages across thousands of years? Could it have been repaired or refaced by later cultures? Or were the younger readings simply the result of contamination from more recent exposure to sunlight during partial burial and re-exposure by shifting sands? One theory proposes that the pyramid was originally much older, then partially rebuilt or restored by later people, perhaps even by a culture that found it already ancient and mysterious. If true, this would make the structure a palimpsest, a monument with multiple layers of history written into its stone, each layer obscuring the one before it. But the real frustration for researchers is not just the inconsistent dates, it's the lack of corroborating evidence. Normally, when a monument produces surprising results, archaeologists can cross-reference them with artifacts found nearby, pottery, tools, human remains. Here there is nothing. The pyramid sits in near-perfect isolation, denying us the usual means of confirmation. This absence opens the door to speculation, some of it far outside mainstream archaeology. A few fringe theorists claim the pyramid could be the work of an advanced civilization lost to history, possessing tools and techniques we do not yet understand. Others suggest it may be far younger than it appears, deliberately aged to mimic great antiquity, though this would require a motive and a builder capable of astonishing feats of deception. There is even an unsettling idea that the structure may have been moved here, piece by massive piece, from elsewhere, perhaps from a site that no longer exists. While this theory is difficult to imagine logistically, it would explain why the stone's mineral composition matches no local quarry. For the listener in the quiet hours of the night, the effect of all this conflicting data is both frustrating and strangely comforting. It is a reminder that not everything yields to measurement, that some mysteries remain slippery no matter how many instruments we bring to bear. The pyramid resists our timelines the way it resists the wind, allowing small traces to be seen, then erasing them again. If the evidence cannot firmly place it in time, then perhaps time is the wrong lens through which to view it. Some structures are less like chapters in history, and more like recurring dreams appearing in different ages, taking on new meanings for those who encounter them, never fully belonging to any one moment. From here, our story turns toward a different kind of theory. If the pyramid stones are not native to this place, and if its age is uncertain, perhaps its builders were not from here either. Perhaps they came from far away across seas, across continents, and brought with them the knowledge to raise such a monument before vanishing back into the currents of history. If the pyramid's stones are foreign to this land, and if no trace of its builders remains, perhaps the simplest explanation is also the most extraordinary. It was built by outsiders, people who came from far beyond this desert, stayed just long enough to raise it, and then disappeared. Ancient history is not short on examples of cultures traveling astonishing distances. The Polynesians crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes, navigating by the stars. The Phoenicians traded across the Mediterranean, and possibly beyond, their ships hugging unfamiliar coastlines. Even earlier, long before writing, humans carried obsidian, shells and pigments, hundreds of miles from their points of origin, suggesting trade networks far larger than their settlements. It is not impossible, then, to imagine a group of skilled builders arriving here from elsewhere, a seafaring people who landed on a distant coast, traveled inland, and selected this site for reasons we can no longer read in the landscape. Perhaps they had knowledge of stonework passed down through generations, methods refined in other lands. If they came from afar, the pyramid might not be an isolated curiosity, but part of a chain of monuments built in places we have yet to connect. Similarities in proportion, stone fitting, or astronomical alignment might be clues scattered across continents, waiting for someone to join them into a pattern. One version of the outsider theory proposes that these builders were traders who established temporary outposts along their routes. The pyramid could have been a ceremonial center for one such outpost, a way to claim and sanctify the land before moving on. When their trade routes shifted, or their homeland declined, the outpost was abandoned, leaving the pyramid stranded in the desert. Another version leans into migration rather than trade. In this telling, the builders were a people on the move, driven by famine, conflict, or climate change. They traveled with their knowledge and tools, seeking a new homeland. The pyramid might have been part of their attempt to anchor themselves in this place, a monument meant to declare their arrival and their permanence. But the desert proved too harsh, and they moved on again, leaving behind the symbol of a settlement that never took root. The most speculative form of the theory suggests something even more ambitious, that the builders were part of an advanced but now lost maritime civilization, one capable of crossing oceans and carrying with them an architectural tradition found in scattered remnants around the globe. Proponents point to certain similarities between this pyramid's proportions and structures in far-flung locations, from South America to Southeast Asia. Mainstream archaeology does not support the existence of such a global prehistoric culture, but it does acknowledge that the movement of ideas, and sometimes people, across great distances, happened earlier and more often than we once believed. Ancient DNA studies have shown surprising connections between populations once thought to have had no contact. Goods from one end of a continent have been found in sites thousands of miles away, dated to eras when travel was assumed to be strictly local. If the builders were outsiders, this raises another question: why choose this place, this exact patch of desert? In its present state, it is barren and inhospitable, but the landscape was different in the distant past. This region may once have had more vegetation, more water, a climate more suited to settlement. Its position may have been advantageous for trade between inland and coastal regions, or for observing particular stars unobstructed by mountains. And perhaps that is the key: stars. If we return to the astronomical precision noted earlier, it is possible the builders came here not for resources or trade, but for the sky itself. This stretch of desert would have offered vast, uninterrupted views of the heavens, perfect for celestial observation or rituals tied to the movement of the stars. The pyramid's alignments might have been the real purpose of its construction, the rest of the settlement merely temporary support for its builders' work. For the nighttime listener, there is an image that lingers: ships pulling away from a coastline, their sails catching the wind, their decks carrying the last of the builders. Behind them, the pyramid stands as a beacon, its sharp edges gleaming in the fading sun, a farewell monument to a land they would never return to. If the outsider builders theory is true, then the pyramid is not just a relic of a lost civilization, it is a fragment of a journey, a way station on a route we can no longer trace. The people who raised it may have gone on to build other monuments elsewhere, each one carrying echoes of the last, their trail scattered like starlight across the map of the ancient world. Long before the first maps, before the first written words, people looked up at the night sky and told stories of how the world was made. In these stories, the builders were not always human. Across cultures, across continents, there are tales of structures, temples, towers, pyramids, that were shaped by beings who came from above. They descend from the stars, the moon, the sun, or from a world beyond the clouds. They arrive with knowledge and tools, unlike anything the people possess. And when their work is done, they vanish, leaving behind something that endures for generations, something the people themselves could never have made alone. The desert peoples, near our nameless pyramid, are not immune to this tradition. Some of their oldest stories speak of a house of the first dawn, raised by visitors, who walked out of the sky on a path of light. In these tales, the builders were tall and clothed in colors like the edge of the sun. They spoke in a language no one understood, yet the people felt no fear. They worked in silence, lifting stones with no ropes, shaping them with no hammers, until the monument stood complete. And then, just as suddenly, they left, ascending back along the same path of light, the pyramid glowing behind them in the early sun. Elsewhere in the world, the echoes are uncanny. In Central America, some Maya legends speak of sky people who brought the knowledge of architecture, agriculture, and astronomy, then departed, promising to return. In parts of Africa, myths describe ancestors who rode the stars and built great structures before vanishing into the heavens. Polynesian oral histories tell of luminous canoes descending from the night sky, whose passengers built stone platforms on remote islands before sailing into the stars again. These myths are rarely taken literally by historians. They are read instead as symbolic ways of preserving the memory of a time when knowledge came suddenly, perhaps through contact with another, more advanced human culture. But symbols have a way of lingering, even when their origins are forgotten. And when so many of them revolve around the same motif, the sudden arrival of builders from the sky, it is tempting to wonder whether there is a shared seed of memory hidden inside them. Could the pyramid in the deep desert be one such monument, its origin retold through centuries of oral tradition until the human builders became skyborn in the telling? If its construction truly required skills and technologies absent from local history, perhaps the story transformed over time into one of supernatural intervention, a way for later generations to explain what they could no longer replicate. And yet, some details in these myths are harder to dismiss. In certain versions, the builder's work was guided by the stars, not just in alignment, but in timing. The monument had to be completed before a particular star shifted from its place in the heavens. This is strangely consistent with the pyramid's own alignments to celestial positions from thousands of years ago. Another recurring detail is sound. In the local legends, the sky builders sang as they worked, not in words, but in long, low tones that seemed to make the air vibrate. Stones lifted and moved as if drawn by the song. This too appears in myths from far-flung places, the idea that sound could move or shape stone. In the modern mind, it feels fantastical, but it is striking how many cultures, independent of one another, carry this same image. For the nighttime listener, there is something hypnotic in this vision. A team of luminous beings walking through the desert under a canopy of stars, their tools invisible, their movements unhurried. The stone rises into place with the ease of setting down a loaf of bread. There is no shouting, no chaos, only a quiet rhythm, the merging of human hands and otherworldly precision. Of course, to the historian's ear, these are poetic images, not proof. Yet even historians acknowledge that myths can preserve memory across immense stretches of time. A flood story may recall an actual rise in sea levels. A tale of fire from the sky might preserve the echo of a meteor strike. And perhaps, in the case of our pyramid, The sky builders were simply a people so unlike the locals, whether in dress, language, or skill, that they seemed to have descended from another world. Still, there is a quiet seduction in leaving the possibility open. The desert is vast. The night sky is endless. And sometimes, in the stillness, you can imagine that the builders really did arrive from beyond the stars, just as the stories say. In an age where every corner of the earth can be photographed from space, the nameless pyramid still manages to keep most of itself hidden. The satellites see it. Yes, a pale geometric shape, etched into the tan expanse of the desert, but they cannot tell its story any more than the wind can. Reaching it is not simple. There are no paved roads, no nearby towns that can serve as staging grounds for casual tourists. Those who visit must travel days by off-road vehicle or camel caravan, guided by people who know how to read the desert's subtle language, the way a line of dunes curves, the way a certain ridge marks the edge of a dry riverbed. Even then, the shifting sand means the approach is never the same twice. For years after its rediscovery, the pyramid was left mostly alone, too remote to attract more than a handful of adventurous archaeologists and local nomads. But in recent decades, as exploration technology has improved and the hunger for lost wonders has grown, its profile has quietly risen. Articles in travel magazines and academic journals have drawn curious eyes. A few documentary crews have made the journey, filming it under the rising sun, capturing its stark beauty and its unsettling loneliness. And yet, there is no visitor center here, no ticket booth or tour guide with a microphone. The pyramid is not managed as a heritage site. It has no official guardians. It exists in a kind of limbo, known to scholars and enthusiasts, but untouched by the infrastructure of mass tourism. Those who have stood at its base describe an odd shift in perception. In photographs, it appears small compared to Giza or Teotihuacan, but in person, the clarity of its proportions makes it feel larger than it is. The desert plays tricks with scale, distances shrink and expand, and the pyramid seems to breathe with the movement of the sun, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the sand. Archaeologists still visit, though not as often as one might think. Funding for such expeditions is limited, and the difficulty of transport makes each trip an undertaking. The last major survey, nearly a decade ago, left with as many questions as it brought. Ground-penetrating radar hinted at possible substructures beneath the pyramid, but the readings were inconclusive, distorted by mineral-rich stone and the natural layering of the desert floor. Meanwhile, locals who pass within sight of it on their nomadic routes still treat it with a kind of distant respect. Some leave small offerings, stones, coins, bits of cloth tied to sticks at the edge of the nearest dune. Whether these gestures are acts of reverence, tradition, or simply habit is unclear, but they suggest that the pyramid is not just an archaeological curiosity, it is still a presence in the cultural landscape. In the digital world, the pyramid has found a new kind of life. Satellite imagery, drone footage, and high-resolution photographs circulate among enthusiasts online. Forums buzz with theories, some grounded in archaeology, others drifting into the realm of the fantastic. People share 3D models and digital reconstructions, imagining what the pyramid might have looked like when it was new, surrounded by gardens or standing alone in an even vaster wilderness. And yet, for all this visibility, the pyramid resists being fully absorbed into the modern age. There are no high-definition scans of every block, no interactive museum exhibit that lets you walk its corridors, because as far as we can tell, there are no corridors. The pyramid has never yielded a clear entrance. Some suspect it is solid, built not as a tomb or chamber, but as a monument without interior. Others think the entrance lies beneath the sand, sealed by time. In a world obsessed with quick answers, the pyramid's refusal to explain itself feels almost defiant. We can film it from every angle, measure it to the millimeter, and still come away knowing no more about its builders than the traders who first stumbled upon it a century ago. For the nighttime listener, There is a certain peace in this. The modern world is noisy with information, most of it fleeting, but here is something that has held its silence for millennia, something that refuses to be hurried, that will not trade mystery for attention. And so it stands, unchanging, unmoved, while the rest of the world spins faster and faster. Every theory we have followed, lost cities, outsider builders, skyborne architects, tries to pull the pyramid into the light of explanation. Each offers a handhold, a way to make sense of the impossible. And yet, after all the measuring, the dating, the speculation, we are left here in the same place where we began, standing before a shape in the sand, listening to its silence. It is not an empty silence. It has weight. The pyramid's stillness is the stillness of something that does not need to be understood in order to exist. It was here before your questions, and it will be here after your answers have been forgotten. This is perhaps the hardest truth for a curious mind to accept, that not every mystery is waiting to be solved. Some are waiting to be experienced. If you sit long enough in the desert night, the wind becomes a kind of voice. It moves across the pyramid's flanks with a sound like slow breathing. The stars wheel above, patient and unhurried. Your heartbeat slows to match the pace of the place, and in that moment, you understand that knowing why it was built is less important than simply knowing it is. We tend to think of history as a chain of causes and effects. This happened, which led to that, which led to here. But monuments like this one remind us that history is also a field of absences. For every story we can trace, there are countless others erased, their outlines left only in the shapes of stones, whose meanings have dissolved into time. The silence between theories is where imagination lives. One person might fill it with visions of an ancient city's glory. Another might picture ships cresting an unfamiliar coastline. Another might hear the deep hum of a star-born song. The pyramid does not choose between them. It holds them all, equally possible, equally unprovable. There is humility in that. In the modern world, certainty is currency. We crave final answers, definitive statements, the satisfying click of a puzzle piece falling into place. But the desert deals in a different economy. Here, mystery is the treasure, and certainty is as fleeting as the wind's patterns in the dunes. Some visitors say that after a few hours in its presence, the pyramid stops feeling like a riddle and starts feeling like a companion, something ancient that has been waiting not to tell you its story, but to hear yours. You project your questions onto it, and in return, it offers you a mirror. What you choose to believe about it says as much about you as it does about the stone. This is the silence between theories, a quiet space where nothing needs to be decided, where the truth can be many things at once, or nothing at all. The temptation, of course, is to keep searching, to dig deeper, to bring in better equipment, to strip away every layer until the truth is bare. But there is a risk in this. In solving a mystery, you may also destroy it. Once a secret is explained, it can never be unknown again, and perhaps that is the pyramid's greatest act of preservation, not just of its own structure, but of its mystery. It stands solid and whole, holding back whatever truth it contains, as if it knows that the not knowing is what keeps people coming back. So we leave it here, in the half-light between possibility and certainty, between the human urge to explain and the equally human need to dream. Twilight returns to the desert. The heat of the day has bled away, leaving the air cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and stone. The sky fades in long, slow layers, gold to rose to deep indigo, until the first stars flicker awake. And there it is again, the pyramid, its lines sharp against the softening horizon, the same silhouette that has watched this sky for untold centuries. It does not move, it does not change. The wind shifts around it, the dunes rearrange themselves, but the pyramid's shadow stretches out as it always has, anchored to the turning of the earth. You stand at its base, just as others have, traders, explorers, storytellers, scientists, and you feel the scale of it in a way no photograph can hold. It is not simply the size of the stones or the precision of the angles, but the sense that it is rooted in something deeper than the sand beneath it. It feels inevitable, as though the desert would be incomplete without it. The questions you carried here, who built it, when, why, feel lighter now, not because they have been answered, but because you understand they may never be. The pyramid has kept its silence longer than any living thing on earth. It is not withholding its story out of cruelty, but out of a kind of quiet certainty. Some things are not meant to be solved. You think of the theories, the legends, the data points that clash and refuse to align. You think of the vanished city that may never have existed, of the outsiders who may never have come, of the sky builders who may only be dreams. And yet somehow, each possibility feels true in its own way, not in the language of proof, but in the language of wonder. The desert night deepens. The stars above shift into their old patient patterns, and the alignments, the builders once marked, return for a moment. Orion's belt, low on the horizon, Sirius glinting like a drop of molten silver. You imagine what it must have been like to stand here thousands of years ago, seeing these same stars in the same places, knowing they would return, and building something to meet them when they did. In the quiet, you begin to notice the smaller sounds, the scrape of sand against stone, the faint hiss of wind curling around the pyramid's edges. Somewhere far off, a lone nightbird calls once, twice, then is silent. You could leave now, and the pyramid would not notice. You could stay for days, and it would not change. It is not here for you, it is here because it has always been here, because it will always be here, because the desert itself has decided it belongs. And in that realization, there is a strange comfort. The world is always moving, erasing, replacing. Empires rise and fall, rivers shift course, languages are born and die, but here, in the shadow of this nameless monument, time feels different, slower, almost still. You look up at its apex, black against the stars, and it feels less like an ending, and more like a beginning. A reminder that mystery does not diminish with age, it grows, that the value of a question is not always in finding its answer, but in the journey the question takes you on. Perhaps, long after your own name is forgotten, someone else will stand here as you do now, feeling the same pull toward the unknown. Perhaps they will bring new tools, new theories, new ways of seeing, and perhaps they too will leave without answers, only with the shape of the pyramid burned into memory, as constant as the night sky above it. The wind rises again, lifting a veil of fine sand that swirls briefly at the pyramid's base before falling still. The stars are bright now, their light cold and sharp. The desert feels endless in every direction. You turn to leave, but pause once more to look back. The pyramid stands alone, its shadow stretching into the darkness, its silence deep as the sky. Whatever else changes, whatever else is lost, it will remain rooted in the space between history and legend, between earth and heaven, between what we know and what we can only imagine. In the end, it does not matter which theory is right. The pyramid's truth is in its endurance, and so it waits, not for answers, not for recognition, but simply to stand forever in the shadow it casts, and forever casting that shadow across the sands of time.